Okay, so we just got done talking about the types of attachment and how you are able to see the types of attachment in young children through the strange situation experiment. So the next question in my head then is, how do you build secure attachment? So we know that secure attachment comes from consistent caregiving. We know insecure attachment comes from inconsistent caregiving. We know that avoidant attachment comes from neglectful caregiving. But how do you make sure that you build that secure connection? What does that look like? Probably, if this were live and I were asking you to give me examples, you would all be able to give me a lot of really good quality examples of how to build a secure attachment. The concept of parenting and the way that we parent is very different today than it was in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And during that period of time, it was not necessarily well known or well accepted that parents needed to provide like comfort and love to their children, which I know probably as I'm saying this sounds really bizarre to you, but it was something that we needed to experiment and to discover scientifically. And that's where this man, Harry Harlow, comes into play. He is a animal psychologist who researched what we now call as comfort contact through several not very nice experiments with monkeys. So what is comfort contact? Comfort contact is exactly what it sounds like. It is comforting interactions with a caregiver. It's being, rocked to sleep. It's being, hugged, told when your parents tell you I love you, when you are little and you're snuggling with your parents on the couch watching TV or a movie, when you're sad or you're hurt or you're not feeling good, seeking out that close, comforting touch with a caregiver or a parent. That all of that is what we would call comfort contact. And Harry Harlow was the man to coin the term comfort contact and was the first person to demonstrate the effect of comfort contact on monkeys and kind of prove scientifically that it was good to hug your kids and it was good to rock your kids to sleep and to snuggle them and stuff like that. Again, I know that probably sounds so bizarre because it's just, a normal part of parenting today. But in the 1940s and 50s especially, it was really seen as like a way to coddle your child. Like if you gave them too many hugs or you were provided too much of that comfort to your child, then they would become dependent and whiny and they would never leave the house. And that the only way to raise good kids was to kind of be aloof from them and to not interact with them in those comforting ways. So now we know scientifically that is not the appropriate way to handle interactions, especially with really young kids. So comfort contact is incredibly critical to attachment, and it's a really normal part of development. So in addition to caring for your needs, feeding you, changing your diaper, doing all of those things, a parent also just has to provide contact for contact's sake. So again, being rocked to sleep, being hugged, being cuddled, stuff like that. How did Harry Harlow prove this? I am actually going to stop here and show you a SciShow video on the experiment that is going to do a good job of kind of explaining it for you.
A lot's changed in the last 60 years or so when it comes to how psychologists think about parenting, especially when it comes to the relationship between a child and their caregivers. In the 1950s, researchers were still trying to figure out whether children bonded with their caregivers only because they were the source of food when they were babies, or if there was more to it than that. And some of the answers were drawn from the research of an American psychologist named Harry Harlow. But Harlow's kind of a controversial figure in psychology. Today, many psychologists think that his methods were inherently unethical because of the way he treated the rhesus macaque monkeys he used as subjects. And nearly everyone agrees he took things too far. When he first started out doing monkey research in the 1950s, Harlow was mostly interested in how they learn. He'd isolate rhesus macaque monkeys from a young age and use them in his studies. As he did this research, he noticed that the young macaques seemed to really like the cloth blankets that covered the floors of their cages. They spent a lot of time with them, clutching them like security blankets. And if you took one away, they'd freak out. This might not seem too surprising, but at the time, there was a bit of a debate in psychology about this sort of thing. On one side, there were the behaviorists who thought that the only reason infants grew attached to their mothers was because their mothers gave them food, like breast milk, a stimulus response sort of thing. On the other side was a psychologist named John Bowlby who thought there was, well, more to it than that. Among other things, he argued that a parent was a source of security and comfort. Harlow thought the monkeys might be getting this sense of comfort from the blankets, and he designed an experiment to test it using two inanimate objects that would act as surrogate mothers, one made of wire and wood, and another made of soft cloth. First, he wanted to see how much time the monkeys would spend with each surrogate if only the wire surrogate supplied food. The monkeys' preferences were clear. They go to the wire mother for food, but then spend the rest of their time cuddling with the cloth mother. To be extra sure, he varied which one was the source of the food, and then scared the infant monkeys with a motorized toy to see which mother they ran to. But it didn't matter where the food was. The monkeys clearly preferred the comfort and security of the cloth mother. Harlow proposed that the cloth mother provided contact comfort for the infant monkeys. It was solid evidence against the behaviorists. His research supported the idea that the monkeys had emotional and attachment needs for their mothers. So you'd think maybe his next move would be to stop doing studies that involved raising infant monkeys in isolation, right? Unfortunately, no. His next move was to do studies that extended the isolation. He isolated monkeys using a kind of vertical chamber for up to a year after they were born, and then introduced them to other monkeys to see how they'd interact. No surrogate, no other monkeys, just an inverted pyramid monkeys couldn't climb out of. His nickname for it was the Pit of Despair, and that was awful. When monkeys were released, they didn't move much, didn't explore their environment, and kept rocking and clasping themselves. Some avoided others entirely, and a few got really aggressive. And it's not like these were just unfortunate side effects of his research. These were the variables he was interested in. He wanted to explore the relationship between social isolation and mental illness. So he was trying to use social isolation to induce psychopathology and depression in monkeys. There are only so many ways you can measure the sadness of a monkey, but they showed clear signs of depression and trauma. He also found that the female monkeys weren't that interested in sex, but if they were impregnated anyway, they didn't care for their babies. Missing that caretaking experience as an infant seemed to make them incapable of it as adults. Harlow continued doing these kinds of experiments for years. Some of them, especially the earlier ones, did help shape psychologists' understanding of the bond between children and their caregivers, and how that bond affects a child's mental health. But this kind of research wouldn't be considered ethical today. The experiments would have to be approved by a review board, and though they always need to weigh the benefits versus potential harms, this kind of research would be considered an unjustifiable amount of pain and distress with little scientific gain. There might have been some scientific value early on, but even if you give Harlow the benefit of the doubt when it comes to his first studies, he didn't seem to learn the lessons of his own research. That these monkeys had emotional needs. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych, which was brought to you.
As the video said, the early work that Harlow did related to comfort contact is important to the field of psychology because it allowed us to scientifically prove that, that those comforting, hugs and cuddles from a caregiver are important to both animals and humans, and proved pretty definitively that, kids require emotional, investment from their parent, and not just, food and clothing, which again was pretty counter to the way parenting was viewed in the 1940s and 50s. That being said, it's always important to kind of explore the darker side of these people and not just be like, Harry Harlow was great, he figured out that you needed to hug your kids, but also to understand that he really took it too far and he was very mean to a lot of monkeys, and not everything he did was super useful to the scientific community. So we shouldn't necessarily just, love him and all of his work. We should be really critical of the way that he approached his scientific findings, and figured out the things that he figured out. The last thing we're going to talk about here is parenting styles. So we got our last person that you need to be familiar with, Diana Bowerman. And she is an American child psychologist who pioneered the work in parenting styles and gave the names to the 4 different types of parenting styles and kind of explored what they look like and what their effect is on children who experience each of those types. It's important to talk about parenting styles when we talk about attachment and comfort contact because, we started with temperament, this biological, inborn personality that babies have, but attachment is oftentimes shaped by how the parent chooses to parent. So you have to take into account both the nature and the nurture side of it. So we're going to go through the 4 different parenting styles, and then we will be done for today. The first one is authoritarian parenting. And oftentimes when we talk, well, not oftentimes, all the time, when we talk about parenting styles, we talk about it in a grid style. So I'm going to see if I can draw here. Yeah, like that. And we got our 4 boxes like a little Punnett square. And then we talk about demandingness. Demand. And you'll see this at the end. And then on this side would be love or comfort. God, I have terrible handwriting with the pad. And depending on the amount of demand and the amount of love, you're going to get yourself into one of these boxes. So an authoritarian parent has a lot of demands. They expect obedience. They expect their rules to be followed, but they don't express a whole lot of love and care. Okay, so they have high demandingness, low affection or love or comfort. They expect you to do what you're told when you're told to do it. If you don't follow rules, then chances are there is a pretty significant punishment coming, stuff like that. This usually leads to kids wanting to rebel, right? Like, especially as kids are seeking more independence in their teenage and adolescent years. Children often want to have a hand in, their future and their decision making. And when a parent says, you will go to this college, you will study this major, you will do these things, it can ruffle some feathers, right? So authoritarian parenting often leads to conflict between child and parent, especially as the child gets older and they start to want to make decisions for themselves and take control of their lives. So it can be, and the person oftentimes the child oftentimes doesn't feel like valued or cared for by the parent because they're lacking that like love and comfort piece. It's just the demandingness. So it can be hard on the child. The next one is permissive parenting. This one is very high in the love and very low in demandingness. So the permissive parent really wants to be the friend parent. The clip that always comes to mind, and we sometimes watch it, and sometimes students just give me this example, is the clip from Mean Girls where Regina's mom says, I'm not like other moms, I'm a cool mom. That is a clear sign of a permissive parent, where they don't want to set rules, they don't want to set expectations. They're very loving and comforting. They're at every baseball game, every, cheerleading competition or whatever it is that you're involved in, but they don't set boundaries. This might sound awesome, but a lot of times it can lead to, first and foremost, like children who are very impulsive and children who don't understand boundaries in other situations. So they might be kids who get into a lot of trouble at school, or kids that, have trouble like holding a job and meeting expectations as they get older because they've never been held to a standard or to a specific boundary. But then also just like kids who are super impulsive and are willing to push the boundaries. A lot of times, these kids are pushing the boundaries to see how far they can take it until their parents will, stop them. You'll oftentimes see, kids acting out, trying to get parents' attention and trying to get their parents to set boundaries for them. So they go out, and start drinking underage or shoplifting or kind of doing these somewhat dysfunctional behaviors, hoping that their parents will take an interest in them. So like from the parent's perspective, they're trying to be like the cool parent or the fun parent. But for a lot of kids, part of the way that we feel our parents love us and care for us is by setting boundaries and trying to keep us safe. Obviously not to the degree of an authoritarian parent, but if you feel like your parent doesn't care if you go to an underage drinking party and then drive yourself home drunk, you're also not going to feel cared for, because you're going to feel like your parent doesn't necessarily care if you live or die, right? So like having some amount of boundaries is usually good. Which brings us to authoritative. And I know authoritarian and authoritative sound similar. They're not. Authoritative is usually considered psychologically the best place for a parent to be, where you are both high in the demandingness and high in like the love or responsiveness. So this parent does show a lot of love and affection. They do provide comfort contact. They do go to your sporting events and your concerts and plays and things like that. But it's coupled with pretty strict rules and expectations. So you know that your parents love and care for you. You also know that they have boundaries and rules that must be followed. But this parent often will work really hard to include a child in decisions. So rather than saying like, no, you can't go to this party, and when you say why, an authoritarian parent would say, because I said so. An authoritative parent would say, would give you a reason, would tell you why they don't think it's a safe place for you to be or why you shouldn't be going there. Which in turn is going to encourage a lot of like open dialogue and discussion between child and parent. It's going to provide like space for a child to become more independent as they get older. And, the parent will begin to allow the child to maybe make more decisions for themselves or to be a stronger voice in the decision-making process. So it has that balance of, I love you and I'm caring for you, but also, I'm going to try to keep you safe and I'm going to set boundaries to make sure that you're acting in your best interest. And then the final one is uninvolved, which is no love and no demandingness. We say uninvolved because there's a lot of reasons that a parent might not be in a child's life. Certainly abusive or neglectful parents are going to fall into this uninvolved, where they don't have a lot of love and care and stuff like that. But an uninvolved parent could also be, a product of like divorce. Maybe if one parent moves to another state and you see them once a year on your birthday, it truly just means that they don't have a say in your life one way or another. They don't call you and tell you they love you. They don't show up to your games, but they also aren't providing rules or boundaries or expectations for you at all. They're just absent. So that might be a neglectful thing. It just might be that they would maybe be more involved, but they are in a different state. It might be because a parent is, in prison. It could be, any number of reasons for uninvolved. That being said, uninvolved parenting tends to have a negative effect on children as well. Like it will make a parent feel, or especially like if the parent is choosing not to be involved, if the parent is neglectful, or if the parent, if there's a divorce situation and a parent moves away and stops contacting the kid, it can lead to a lot of feelings of inadequacy in the child, feeling like, why doesn't my parent want to be around me? Why don't they want to talk to me? What did I do wrong to drive my parent away? That tends to be less common in a situation where like maybe a parent is in prison, because there is a very definitive reason for that lack of involvement. But it still, can have that negative impact. And then I do believe you have this or something similar to it in your note guide. This is the Punnett square I was talking about. So you have level of demandingness, level of support, responsiveness, love, like whatever you want to call it. And if you match those, you'll get your 4 different parenting styles. And that is going to wrap up our social development in childhood for today. As always, if you have questions or concerns, please let me know. Have a great day.